I am Fetch, and with me today is Neko.
Hey everyone.
And Kuma.
Yo.
So, not going to stall too long. We're going to be covering the Treasure 4 tournament. Treasure Series 4. We have been going at this for a while now. This is our third or fourth time covering one of the tournaments.
Well, there've been 4. I'm guessing it's probably 4.
I think this is the fourth.
Yeah. So, no need to stall. If you've watched our previous, we're going to be mostly similar. We will be having a special Bowcaster segment. Or Bowmaster, not Bowcaster. We're not talking about Wookiees here.
That's next year.
Oh, yeah. Universes Beyond, yep.
Oh, man. But no, we'll be having a special Bowmaster segment a little bit down the line. But starting off, hopping right into top 16. This top 16 was a mix of a whole lot of very well-known, very powerful decks, as well as a handful of less popular. Starting off at 16, we've got one that you'll see much more later on with Tivit.
This sure is a Tivit deck.
Man, we've talked about Tivit a whole lot here.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say the more I see these Tivit decks show up, the more I look at them, the more I watch them play, the more I think about them, the more I like them. I was pretty low on this deck when it first started popping up. I'm like, oh, 6-mana commander, good job. That's totally something you're going to do a lot in CDH, but it's not exactly a 6-mana commander because it refunds you 2 mana instantly at a minimum.
Mm-hmm.
So you can just tap out for your commander and then have interaction. Because let's be real, nobody's counterspelling a Tivit in CEDH, right? We all got to run Miscast and Flusterstorm to hit those AdNauses. And yeah, there's just a couple different variations on the deck, but really the core of it is pretty much what it is. And a guy just threw it together my local play group. He's been doing well with it. I like the deck quite a bit. I think it's here to stay. I think it's an excellent choice.
What I will say about Adam and Exile's list particularly is that it is a bit unique for a Tivit deck. You are running a couple new cards, Orcish Bowmasters, of course, Lotho, but some other spicy tech as well. Hullbreaker Horror. You have Steel Enchantment. You have Essence Flux. So just trying to flicker the Tivit and make it a little bit bigger, which is interesting to see. Stubborn Denial as well. So running some less seen tech.
I was just going to say, Essence Flux is kind of like, when you have Tivit out, it's kind of like Rite of Flame with 3 clues attached to it. So definitely not the worst card.
Yeah, that's true.
Running. Yeah, on Opposition Agent, also on Lotho Corrupt Sheriff, which I think is a legit good card we're going to see quite a bit of going forward. Steel Enchantment, I'm guessing, is the out mid-range, the mid-range decks, right? They play Heuristic Study, you go my Heuristic Study. I used to play this card.
Mm-hmm.
It's been seeing a little bit of an increase in popularity recently. There's been a handful of decks starting to slot it in just because of Heuristic is everywhere. They are also the only deck in our top 16, the only Tivit deck in our top 16, important thing to note, that is on AdNause.
So is that what we're seeing here? Are the Tivit decks just kind of moving off AdNause in general? Because it seems like the deck can support it perfectly fine.
I mean, Jamaican Dude brought AdNause for their win last time, and we're seeing, spoilers ahead, the winner this time was not on AdNause, so...
I mean, the average mana value of this deck without AdNause is 1.28. That's got to be pretty close to, like, a Rogsai.
Yeah, I think it really just comes down to personal preference. The deck is so good that you can make whatever small changes you want to the thing and have it still be good.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. It's just, I mean, I'm on record as not being a big Turbo fan, but I just don't see how you don't run AdNause in here. It just seems like it's a free card you can run that'll just probably win you the game if you resolve it. You don't even have to make a lot of concessions in your list. It's already basically an AdNause deck.
You just mid-range so well that you don't necessarily need it, but I can also see that it can give you that extra insurance, so I'm a fan of it, but you get so much card advantage, you have so much mana, you have so many good pieces in Esper right now that you'll just get there naturally.
Yeah, I'm guessing the logic is if you get to 5 mana, do you cast AdNause or do you just get one more and cast Tivit?
Yeah, that's fair logic.
I feel like I'd probably just cast the AdNause. Like, this deck has all the cards you need to win after an AdNause. I'm really not sure why you wouldn't do that.
I mean, I have made my opinions on AdNose well known, so I'm a big fan of it, and I don't think it should be cutting. But as we're moving on to 15th place with our second Tivit, Ward 3 is broken and your vote does not matter by B-Sphere.
Yeah, I gotta say, that Ward 3 always screws me up when I sit across from Tivit. You kind of forget it's there, and then you go, oh, my spell's countered. Oh, crap.
Yeah, we've just been talking about our opinions on Tivit. We don't need to spend a ton of time on this, but I will mention that unlike our last Tivit, where they were all in on adopting those new Lord of the Rings cards, this list did not include any of them. Not even Bowmaster.
Yeah, this is a much more standard, like a month ago Tivit list, or even a couple weeks ago Tivit list.
Yeah, and I can respect that. Tournaments aren't always the best place to try out new stuff you're not sure about. So if you were a little iffy on the Lord of the Rings cards, it might be better off not to play them in a big cash tournament.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they were just like, I know this list, I know how good it is right now. I don't have the time to do a ton of grinding like the day before the tournament with the now officially released cards, and so I'm just going to stick with what I know. It's a fair choice.
The only other thing I do want to say about this list is on Reanimate, just for that extra recursion value, but no other lines with it besides that.
Yeah, Reanimate's just a good card.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't hate it.
But as we move on to 14th here, a deck that also runs Reanimate, because it's a good card, although this one gets a little bit more value out of it. We've got Malcolm Vial Smasher. Grixis are good colors. Malcolm's a good card. Seems good to me. We've been talking about how Malcolm's in a really good position to potentially take some wins in the near future, and Grixis Malcolm is definitely worth considering for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say Grixis Malcolm's my favorite Grixis deck, but it is a Grixis deck. I mean, there's certainly nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, the value it can get you is really crazy. One thing I do like for this deck that's kind of cute tech now that it has the Bowmaster, it runs the wheel effect, the Whispering Madness that has a cipher that you can put onto Malcolm. And with it, Malcolm having flying, you can do some very silly things with those cards.
Oh, that is gross with Bowmaster. I forgot about that card for a minute.
I think a lot of people did.
Do you want to read that out for our viewers?
Yeah, so Whispering Madness is basically Windfall for a black, blue, and 2 colorless. And then it also has the Cipher ability, which Cipher basically means you can exile it and give a creature, whenever it deals combat damage, you can cast the spell, a copy of the spell from exile, without paying its mana cost. So the idea is you can swing it with Malcolm and have a consistent wheel effect every turn.
When they've got Narset, they've got Notion Thief, they've got Bowmasters, they're all in on the wheels.
They really are.
This is kind of like Grixis Opus Thief.
It really is. Yeah. And this is more...
I don't hate it.
It's more mid-rangey, right, than a Grixis list might be, because you have your Niv, you have your Malcolm plan, you're not on AdNause, instead you're on, like, Bolas' Citadel, you have the Underworld Breach package, of course, but definitely more grindy, Grim Hireling, Professional Facebreaker, definitely a cool list.
I just kind of saw Grixis colors and assumed this was turbo, but it's clearly not. I think I like it a little bit more as not a turbo deck than I do as a turbo deck. I think you can definitely have better commanders if you're trying to do turbo and Grixis, but as far as mid-range goes, this seems like a pretty good option. And I'm just thinking Whispering Madness, right? Cast it, immediately get a bunch of Bowmaster triggers. Attack, immediately get a bunch more Bowmaster triggers. That's actually probably 1 or 2 dead players at that point, because you're going to have an army that's probably nearly a 40-40, and you're going to have about 40 damage to throw around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am a little bit surprised. They are not running Opposition Agent in the deck. Mm-hmm. They do have it listed in the sideboard, so that's definitely something they've considered, but...
Yeah. I mean, it feels kind of wrong not to play that card in mid-range, but I don't know. They got plenty of good stuff in here already. It's not like I'm seeing a card that's an obvious, oh yeah, just cut that.
Yeah. It's a good card, and I think it would really help this strategy. But like you said, there's just so many hate pieces already that you're hurting them in a lot of other ways. Plus, you just have the Malcolm potential to win out of nowhere, or not out of nowhere, but really quickly with Glinthorn Buccaneer, so...
Trickery Charm? I take it back. There's a Trickery Charm in here that can probably go.
talk about more Malcolm a little bit later, but for now, we'll be moving on to another interesting deck with Jensen in 13th, being played by Urksy.
So this one kind of gets me a little bit because Urksy titled the deck Jensen All Bad Cards, and yet refuses to run any bad cards. This is a Hermit Druid deck that does not run the bad cards that generally are run to support Hermit Druid, which kind of is throwing me off here because I kind of thought the whole appeal of Jensen Carthalion was that you could basically have Lurrus as your commander, but be in 5 colors to run Hermit Druid. And here it's in here as a plan, but there's no Narcomoeba, there's no Dread Return. You basically have to do it with Lurrus, and that to me is a little surprising.
I mean, fair. I do think Hermit Druid. Okay, I will say, as someone who has not played Hermit Druid once and has only played against Hermit Druid like once or twice, I'm not the expert on the subject, but I think Hermit Druid is already a card that just draws so much aggro, especially given they don't have any haste enablers. So there is not running the Tyvar, they're not running the whatever the world enchantment is that gives everything haste, Crossroads.
Concordant Crossroads? Yeah. Something like that.
They are much more on the AdNause plan, even running Bring to Light.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a $5. This is a 5-color deck that just has Hermit Druid, right? Other than that, you're running all your other 5-color value. You have Mnemonic Betrayal, you have Thassa's Oracle, you have Underworld Breach, and Druid's just a line that you can run in this deck. And if it works, good. And if you're stopped, you have all the other good stuff backups that you could want.
Yeah, like I completely agree with you, Neko. I'm just kind of wondering why you'd want to do that. Like, there are better 5-color commanders than Jensen Carthalion. To me, the main reason to write him over anything else is to focus on Druid. And if you're not going to focus on Druid, why aren't you just, I don't know, Kenrath or something?
Weirdly enough, they run Aether Vial in this deck, which is not a card that I've seen anywhere else.
That's pretty. They also run Born Upon a Wind. Are they trying to do like end of turn instant speed Hermit Druids? Is that kind of where we're at here?
Born Upon a Wind is also just a pretty scary card.
Yeah,
it's a new card for those of the viewers who don't know. It's a new card from Lord of the Rings set. That is a 2-mana instant, 1 in a blue. And it says you may cast spells this turn as though they had flash, and you draw a card.
Yeah, just being able to play at instant speed, being able to win under another opponent's win, it's just such a strong effect.
Oh yeah, I love instant speed wins in tournaments, but generally not ones that make you run cards like Born Upon the Wind. Yeah, I like ones where like your commander lets you win at instant speed more than I like this one card in your deck lets you win at instant speed. But I mean, instant speed wins are instant speed wins.
I mean, we all can't be Liberator Urza's Battle Thopter now, can we?
No, every deck is now.
I was thinking more Magda, but yeah.
Now, honestly, I think this is a card that we may see rise in popularity as it goes on. Because if you compare it to like Final Fortune, in some ways it's way worse. But in a lot of ways, it is just as good, if not better.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned Final Fortune, and I'm actually curious that this is not in the list. Because I feel like that with your Hermit Druid could be some good combo potential.
Yeah, I'm guessing they didn't like the double red because there's not a lot of red cards in this deck.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You've got Breach, you've got Dockside.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think Born Upon a Wind and Final Fortune are great comparisons at all, because if you're using Born Upon a Wind on someone else's turn, it's because you probably didn't do anything on your turn. So you're not really getting an extra turn. You're just kind of delaying the time at which you take your turn.
Well,
Final Fortune's actually giving you an extra turn.
If you get silence, right, there's a lot of silence. Born Upon the Wind can kind of let you go again on another player's upkeep. You know, Ranger Captain, something like that.
I think one of the biggest things that Born Upon a Wind can do is that it can win on the stack.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's why you're running it. That's not really the same thing as Final Fortune at all. It's more of, like you said, win on the stack.
Which we were saying that they don't really have any other Hermit Druid cards. They do run Memory's Journey. Mm-hmm. So they do have that as a Hermit Druid. Not necessarily like win on the spot, but it at least does allow them to do stuff with it.
Well, that's more of a, oops, my Druid didn't work, I'm still going to win now.
Yeah, well, and it gives them interaction as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And if you look at this card, right, for an effect like this, it's a blue and a colorless, so only 2 mana, instant speed, plus it nets you a card by letting you draw, which is, for an effect like this, pretty good.
Yeah, I just think it's more interesting in Necropotence decks is another way for them to draw a bunch of cards and then immediately try to win in the end step.
Mm.
But even then, at 2 mana, it's like you have to have 5 mana to attempt that with a Necropotence, and at that point, you should probably just AdNause.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it'll definitely see play in some Necro-focused decks for sure. I'm not sure it belongs too many other places.
I mean, I like it for Vadric, but that's neither here nor there.
But I mean, you were talking about why not just play Kenrath, and in 12th place, we have a Kenrath list.
See, you go up one place in the standings and you play Kenrath.
I mean, it's not a Druid Kenrath list.
Well, I don't think people really play that kind of deck very much anymore.
Not as much anymore, no.
Not many people can play Kenrath anymore, so I was really happy to see this deck turn up today, or at this event. And this one's really all in on the ETBs. You have your Cloud Shift, you have your Deadeye Navigator. This is the one where you want to get those dockside loops going with Emil. You want to do silly things with Displacer Kitten. Just pump all that mana into Kenrath.
Yeah, it's pretty much your mid-range Kenrath list. It's very focused on mid-game value and, yeah, like you said, ETB loops.
Mm-hmm. To the point that this one is on Luris, which is a piece of tech that you don't see too often, but like you could Luris, you could have Displacerkin, and you could get infinite mana with something like Lion's Eye Diamond and just get your infinite mana that way.
That's cute.
Yeah, that's an interesting choice because Kenrath kind of does some of that himself. Not as well, but
Some cute double cat combos.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah, I think cute is a good word for this list. There's a lot of cute in here.
Mm-hmm. All while, again, playing that 5-color shell, that 5-color good stuff, a lot of good interaction. Breach, Thassa's Oracle, of course. Spellseeker. I think this is on the, this is on the Spellseeker Displacer Kitten line 2 with Entomb and Reanimate. So, a lot of different avenues.
Yeah, not really a bad magic card in the list.
Nor should there be. But in 11th place, we've got our second Malcolm Vial Smasher.
That's not something you would have guessed before the tournament.
Malcolm's a good card, and Grixis are good colors.
Mm-hmm.
So Malcolm Vial, not surprising to see it perform. This one is much more turbo than the last one.
It really is.
Very different lists.
Mm-hmm. This one is on the Pier of the Abyss as well as the Ad Nauseam. It doesn't look like it's on the Bolas' Citadel, but it's not on Niv. It's not on some of those other hate pieces we saw. No Notion Thief. It is on the Bowmasters, of course, but
I mean, that's kind of the thing about Bowmasters. I'm sure we'll talk more about it in our segment, but one of the best answers in Orcish Bowmasters is an Orcish Bowmasters.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you don't love what the card does for your strategy, it does clean up other people's. Pretty nice.
It does. But you still are on these wheel effects. No Whispering Madness in this list.
No, that will be a cute tech to see whether that picks up in popularity going forward.
Mm-hmm.
But this also,
I'm a believer.
This deck doesn't run Narset. It doesn't run Notion Thief. So it's much less real reliant.
I mean, Bowmaster just makes me want to play Opus Thief, and those are words I never thought I'd say.
Oddly enough, this one is on the Curiosity, but not on the Niv. So is that just extra value?
It's good on Vial Smasher, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it synergizes with Vial Smasher.
It gives you extra value. They're still running Mayhem Devil, so it does not combo with Mayhem Devil, but a lot of draws with Mayhem Devil. It gives you draws with Orcish Bowmaster.
I was going to say, yeah, guys, the obvious one here, Bowmasters. That's a pretty good card with Bowmasters.
Yeah.
And then it also technically can combo with, in case your Malcolm's not out, your other pirate.
True. Though this one, not on the Reckless Fireweaver combos either, so yeah, definitely more, I guess, streamlined in terms of Grixis value.
This is what I would expect Malcolm Vial Smasher to look like.
I mean, it's hard to go wrong with Malcolm.
Yeah.
Most Malcolm lists are going to be good.
It's hard to go wrong with Grixis.
Also, both of these are true.
Mm-hmm. Even when your other commander, Vial Smasher, doesn't really do much for you, just the colors and the utility of Malcolm, so strong.
Yeah. But moving on to both 10th and 9th place being Nagila, both of which being run by pretty well-known pilots, with Memo for 10th and Puka for 9th.
You got a lot of back-to-back same deck lists in this tournament. That's kind of, or same commanders anyway. That's kind of cute.
Speaking of back-to-back, we have Memo, who has been on a tear with this deck. just multiple performances by them up until this point.
And Memo adding the Bowmasters to the list. Meanwhile, Puka keeping it out.
I just kind of don't get how you don't run Orcish Bowmasters in Nagila. You need to kill opposing Bowmasters, and you need to clear the way for your 1/1s to hit people. It just seems like a total slam dunk in Nagila. Like, if you're doing the most turbo of a turbo, like AdNause, Underworld Breach, Nagila list, maybe not. But anything less than that, I don't know how you don't run the Bowmasters.
I mean, slots can be tight. It's a 5-card list that you have to find room for a whole lot of cards, so I get it. But it does seem worth, in my opinion, to run the Bowmaster.
I mean, slots can be tight, but I think people are going to find room for Orcish Bowmasters real fast if they haven't already.
And looking at Memos in particular, the Chance for Glory is a very interesting include for me.
Chance for Glory is a fun one, though. For those who probably don't know, instant speed for 1 red and a white. Creatures you control gain indestructible, and then it has Final Fortune text. Take an extra turn at the beginning of that turn's end step. So it's kind of like Final Fortune number 2, but it also gives your army indestructible. Which I guess if you're going on the swing Nagila that people plan, that can actually, the indestructible can actually put you over the top because you don't lose warriors swinging into blockers for a turn.
That's the big reason why Chance for Glory is seen in Nagila and pretty much nowhere else.
Yeah,
I think it's a little too cute, but the card can definitely do things for the list.
And Memo also being on the Final Fortune, so kind of doubling up on those effects, really valuing that extra turn.
Yeah, I think Final Fortune's pretty standard in Nagila by now, but yeah, like if you're going to run Chance for Glory, you better also run Final Fortune. I don't see how you could run Chance and not Final.
Yeah, absolutely.
Also on Samut Vizier of Noctamoon, which I think is definitely going to be a Nagila card going forward. They're both on it.
Oh, it's an amazing Nagila card. That thing is nuts in Nagila.
I like it. I have thoughts on it compared to Toski, but I'm not a Nagila player, so I'll keep those to myself for now.
I think it's way better than Toski in Nagila. I would not play Toski in Nagila. Samut's not quite a slam dunk, but pretty close.
But as we move on from our Nagila conversation, on to more good stuff, more Bowmaster, with Ikrom being brought by Dom, who has been playing this deck for quite a while and been performing with this deck for quite a while.
Yeah, and this looks like just a very fast turbo list to me. There's a few mid-rangier cards in here, but I remember getting into a big argument with a bunch of AdNause players and being thrown an Ikrom list to show me, just how fast decks can be. And this definitely looks like one of those that's trying to just be as fast as it possibly can. And I guess you do have a little bit of stability with Krom in the command zone if you have to go more mid-range if that peters out. Or, you have Ikra to make sure your life total stays high into the mid-game if you haven't got a chance to pop your Nas yet. You do get to run Culling Ritual basically for free, which I am a huge fan of decks that do that. A lot to like here. It's just a very good list.
Yeah. I've thought about Ikrom as blue Korvold, except for you're giving up the combo piece of, well, I say combo piece, the combo potential from Korvold in order to get blue, which blue is good.
To me, it's kind of like Rogsai, although slightly slower and slightly more resilient, I think is how I tend to think about it. It's Rogsai slid a little bit more down towards the mid-range end of the spectrum.
I kind of think of it, comparing it to Blue Farm, you just sacrifice or changing out white in exchange for green, which you lose a lot of those silence effects for protection and interaction, as well as the extra value that Timna gets you in things like Esper Sentinel. But you gain some of those faster dorks, and like you said, Kuma, you get Culling Ritual, which is just such a strong card from when you're trying to turbo off.
If you're playing any kind of AdNause deck into a Staxy metagame, Culling Ritual is probably your best friend in the whole world.
Oh, yeah. Great card.
It is.
But comparing it to Blue Farm, 7th place, we've got GOVC bringing that Blue Farm.
I mean, what can I say? We've said it all. So we're going to talk about our favorite wine pairings or something instead, I guess.
Blue Farm's good. Deck
Blue
has
Farm's
added
good.
Bowmaster. Bowmaster's real good in Blue Farm. Don't know what more to say.
No Lotho in here, though. I kind of think Lotho is probably really good in Blue Farm, too.
You don't really have a mana outlet in the same way that, like, Atraxa does or Tivit. So I'm not as sold on it, but I understand your thinking there.
Your mana outlets ad nauseum in your 5-mana commander.
Fair.
Yeah,
You got plenty of things to do with that kind of mana in blue farm. I mean, it may not be as good in blue farm as it is in what you said, but I'm a little surprised not to see it here. I'm not 100% sure that's a slam dunk in blue farm, but it seems like it probably is.
yeah. When you think blue farm, this is kind of the list you would probably envision right now.
But moving on to one of our other top decks of the format, a deck that has really shown itself to be just as good as it is, with one of our two Kinnons in the top 16 here.
Yeah, it's. I'm actually in a weird spot with Kinnan, right? Because I agree with you. Like, it's a really strong deck. But if you had asked me a month ago, I would have been much higher on this deck. And I've kind of come down on it a bit. And now with Bowmasters kind of trotting around, it's even more so.
That's fair. I still think it's a good deck, though. And
Oh, for sure.
We've got 6th place with Pingmeister Pong, and not to spoil too much, but 4th place with Wounded Satellite. Both of these very well-known Kinnan players, very, very well-respected Kinnan players, and for good reason.
Mm-hmm. Those names you have seen in the top 16s before, on these decks, no less.
Yeah, both of these lists are running somewhere in between Big Flips and Non, with Pingmeister leaning more away from the Big Flips and Satellite leaning more towards. But both of them, they've got somewhere in between, which is fair.
Ping is trying more to kind of get that Basalt Monolith, right? You know, you have the Tezzeret, you have the Reshape, the Transmute Artifacts, a lot more of those pieces to try to get that Monolith out as quickly as possible.
But enough talking about Kinnan. Moving on to a deck that I have been somewhat enamored with as of late, with 5th place Atraxa, brought by Punny Name, who, I don't know for anyone else, but if you've been following Atraxa, Punny Name is one of the two big names for it. Chris K. Claw was the one who first really pushed it into the limelight, and then Punny Name has been consistently putting up top performances with 21 points in Swiss.
Mm-hmm.
That is 4 wins, 1 draw, 0 losses.
Mm-hmm.
Hard to argue with that.
Yeah. Punny Name, that's also P on face, correct?
Yes, same person.
Yeah, so, and even in the description, you can see 4-1-1, Mox Masters, 3-1-1, Ka0s 3. So this deck does get results.
No, this deck just slams. It's a great deck. This has got to be queen of the food chain lists by now. I think Kazir Ukuma has been dethroned.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and being introduced to a lot of new cards from Lord of the Rings that they are a fan of. Delighted Halfling, really good in Atraxa, just being able to get that down uncounterable. Getting Lotho, Corrupt Sheriff, which is a card that I probably need to make room for in my Atraxa list, because Funny Name talking highly about its performance in this tournament, as Lotho really getting you the ability to cast Atraxa consistently quickly. And then we've been talking about it, Bowmasters is in here.
Mm-hmm.
On stream, we saw a very impactful Bowmasters out of this Atraxa list.
We did. I think it was like something like 39 or 38 damage in a single turn between pings and combat damage.
It was insane.
Easily.
Yeah.
Just a wheel will get you into that territory.
Mm-hmm. I have some thoughts on that I'll save for the Bowmaster segment, but yeah, this deck really showed how good it can be when it goes off early, because it controlled that entire game.
Mm-hmm.
Also, another card in here that I do want to highlight, Stern Scolding, which I don't think is getting near enough talk, and I like it.
It just doesn't seem like the kind of deck that really needs to counter a creature spell, but I mean, I think the card is totally fine. The one in here that kind of surprises me is Elesh Norn, Mother of Machines. What's that doing?
That surprised me as well. I think it's because Elesh Norn is an effective stacks piece against a bunch of decks, as well as you have a lot of value off of ETVs.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, you get 2 Atraxa triggers, I guess, if you resolve it with this out.
And so I think that's the reason behind them putting it in there. I'm not quite confident that it's supposed to be in the deck. I think it's a little bit iffy, personally.
I remember.
Yeah, isn't 1 trigger usually enough?
Usually. Or at least enough to get you going to get a second trigger with Kitten. I will say, when we interviewed Christopher K. Claw after his win with this deck, he did highlight the Elesh Norn, saying he teched it in just to try it and that he wasn't a fan of it. So I'd be curious to hear what Punny's experience is with it.
It certainly would be interesting. Maybe we'll have them on another time. But as we move on, we've already talked about with fourth place, the Kinnan from Wounded Satellite. Very well done. But going on to third place, we've got the 5-color Sissy, played by Black Weddle.
Yeah, and I think it's worth pointing out too that there were 5 Sissy Weatherlight captain players in this tournament, so that definitely got a bounce after Comedian did so well with it in the last one, I think, and one of them made it to the top.
Mm-hmm. I think Sissy has been creeping up for a while. It's been getting more spotlight potential or more performances, and I'm on the Sissy Discord, and a lot of people have been kind of throwing their hats into the ring for these tournaments. And have been having pretty good success with them.
Yeah, it's a deck that has been, weirdly enough, getting more and more pieces to it that you don't realize it's a piece until you see it in action, and then you're like, oh, that's actually pretty scary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, at the rate they're printing legendary creatures, Sissy is going to gain faster than quite a few other decks. That's definitely where we're at.
And if you ask a number of Sissy players, the tech you get for their deck is probably going to be different from each one. That's just the versatility that this commander offers. Can you tell I'm a Sissy fan? But this list in particular is running kind of more of those legendary creatures. A lot of the Lord of the Rings cards. You have Lotho, you have Bowmaster. You had one other, I think you have
Flowering of the White Tree is in there, and that's a card that I think a lot of people didn't think about before the card came out, but it's a legendary enchantment for double white that has legendary creatures you control get +2/+1 and have ward 1, and non-legendary creatures you control get +1/+1.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this takes your smallest Sissy and turns it into your biggest Sissy, right? If you have a 2/2 Sissy out, you can get the Flowering, and then you have a 5/5 Sissy, and you can get any legendary card you want at that point, pretty much.
Yeah, I think the ward is very relevant. It doesn't give you as much power as Cultist, but still a really strong effect just for boosting it.
Yeah, someone taps out to kill your Sissy, it's counterspell and my Sissy's bigger. Like that's pretty nice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This one is also on Mount Doom. That is a piece of tech that can combo with Derevi, Emil, and a multi-mana source that can just be flickered to act as an outlet to ping your opponents to death. So that's a tech people were excited about in this deck. Kind of fills the place of Kroxa in most decks. I run Kenrath, which I do like better than Mount Doom still, but really strong outlet. And it's a land, right? You can't complain about having a 2-color land that's legendary in this deck.
Yeah, my favorite thing about this Sissy list, though, is that it actually runs a large amount of interaction.
Mm-hmm.
There are 17 instants in this deck. You've got a Braids, Abrupt Decay, Offer You Can't Refuse. This deck's actually running a reasonable interaction package. And like what I keep seeing with Sissy lists is they're running like 5 interactions, like 3 stacks pieces, and about 3 million mediocre to terrible legendary creatures to support the Sissy plan. And this one kind of bucks that trend a little bit. I like this Sissy list more than I like quite a few other ones.
Yeah, definitely a high amount of interaction, which is good. Stern Scolding.
It even runs more interaction in the creatures.
Mm-hmm.
It's not even just the instance. It also runs creature-based interaction. Like it has Urza Resurrected in here.
I mean, it's 4 mana interaction, but yeah, it is interaction. You got the endurance. I like to see that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, this is closer to something that I would play as a Sissy deck. Neko's the big Sissy fan here. I'm kind of the anti-fan. I always feel like with Sissy, there's that episode of South Park where everyone keeps trying to tell Cartman, oh, hey, I think you'd really like Family Guy. He keeps screaming back, nothing like Family Guy. And I feel like that's me with Sissy with like everyone's like, why don't you play Sissy? This seems like exactly your kind of deck. Like you would love this deck. This deck does everything you want to do. I keep screaming back like, no, I'm nothing like Sissy Weatherlight Captain. But I mean, it's just there's just so many cards in here that just don't seem good on their own. Like Saheeli Rai, like that's just not a strong card. It's in here because you need a certain amount of synergy with Sissy, I would imagine, just to name one.
It's a combo piece.
It is.
Or something like Catilda Dawnheart Prime. It's like that's just not a strong Magic card.
Saheeli is good because it checks a lot of boxes, right? You can copy your Dockside, you can copy your Blue Tenders to continue the train, Plus, it's an outlet for the Nicol Bolas Aminatu combo, so it definitely has a lot of utility. It has even more if you run Feldar Guardian, which this deck isn't on the Vivian Feldar package.
Yeah, but if you don't have those exact situations, it's just bad.
Yeah, but Sissy thrives on getting those exact situations, which the deck can do so well.
This is exactly it. I love Toolbox. I love Stacks. I love Sissy, more so the green-white one. I should, by all reason, love this deck, but I just don't.
Mm-hmm.
Well, moving on to a deck that you should love. I hope you'll love it. We got Marith. Second place, Arab Prince.
I love Marath.
Mm-hmm.
For those who don't know, I had the database list for this until it got removed from the database. I was so psyched to see Marath, and I was rooting for Arab Prince the whole way. So what it is it's a pretty stacksy deck that has its commander not only as a little bit of board control, but also as a combo piece for quite a few cards that are otherwise just good with it. Like your main combo in Marath is Marath Will of the Wild, Conclave Mentor, and Cryptic Trilobite, which basically lets you do infinite Marath activations to kill the table. But the thing is, like, Conclave Mentor and Marath on its own is just good, right? Conclave Mentor gives Marath the ability to pay 1 mana to put a +1 counter on it. So I guess I should probably say what Marath does, because I'm sure quite a few listeners don't know. So Marath costs Naya mana, it's 0/0, enters the battlefield with number of +1 counters equal to the amount of mana spent to cast it. And then it has the ability pay X, remove X counters from Marath, choose one, put X +1 counters on target creature. Marath does X damage to any target, or put an XX green elemental on the battlefield, and X cannot be 0. So you can pick off all the Dorks of the world, all the Kinnons of the world, all the Nagilas of the world, the Timnas pretty nice and easily with Marath. And then stuff like Conclave Mentor is a nice synergy piece with it, because that doubles the +1 counters that an effect puts on a creature, or doesn't double, it increases by 1 the amount of +1 counters put on a creature by an effect. So you can then kind of use that to refill your Marath with your spare mana. And then if you get Cryptic Trilobite out or something like Mana Echoes, then you're just infinite and you kill the table. And a lot of the combos even kill the table through a Rule of Law. So you can have like a Rule of Law or a Archon of Emeria down and still machine gun the table with some, but not all, of the Marath combos. It does a lot of cool things. It is actually a stacks deck that can win pretty fast if it tries to. As fast as an AdNause deck? No, but this is one that can pretty quickly close out the game when it needs to.
Mm-hmm. Being able to break parity under your own stacks pieces is such a good quality to have for any stacks deck. I also like the tech that it has with Nightshade Peddler, where you can just give Marath Death Touch and ping any creature for even 1 damage, and it will die because Death Touch, and just go pew pew, and you're good.
Would you believe when I was working on the deck actively, that was probably a top 3 card I got pushed back against running? People are like, is Nightshade Peddler really that good? Why are you really running Nightshade Peddler? Are you sure you want Nightshade Peddler? I'm like, yes, yes.
Few times.
Like, believe it or not, like, that card got a lot of pushback from going into the list, but it 100% belongs. And yeah, we saw on stream too, just the amount of dead Tassigers and Nagilas and everything else from putting a Death Touch creature with Marath. Like, it keeps the board completely clear, and so many decks need a creature on the battlefield to win, and that just says, nope, not happening.
Mm-hmm. Especially right now, this current creature meta. Creature removal, really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing I really like about what Arab Prince did is one of Marath's biggest weaknesses was that it had a lot of trouble drawing cards. It was very easy to get to a point where you just didn't have anything to do, and Arab Prince really added a lot of card advantage to the deck, more so than I had when I was playing it for sure. And I definitely saw him drawing a lot of cards on camera, and it seemed like it worked out pretty well for him.
Yeah, it was really well made deck, really well piloted deck. And we'll see whether it can continue to do top performances. But speaking of continuing to top performances, first place, we've got Tivit. I mean, we've talked about how Tivit has been a top deck, but we've got Tivit being brought by a pretty brand new pilot here, as Temjin has been playing Magic for about 1.5 years. And this is their second ever tournament.
Oh, wow.
It's a pretty big tournament to win as your second ever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
So, I mean, not much spice to talk about as far as the list. It's pretty standard Tivit. You got the Bowmaster in there. You've got no Nas, but that's not a big deal. It's nothing too crazy.
You got the Urza in here,
The Urza.
which I like to see.
You have the Dam and the Toxic Deluge. I like the double removal. I think the Phyrexian Metamorph's cute. At very least, you get a double Tivit, which can be really strong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I don't think this is flavor of the month. It's not going anywhere for a while.
Mm-hmm.
But speaking of flavor of the month, let's talk about something that may or may not be. We'll have to find out, I guess. We're having the Bowmaster talk.
Mm-hmm.
You mean not going away for a while, right?
Unless it's banned, but may I?
Oh, let's not get into that.
I won't, but I do want to talk about the card because we highlighted in Atraxa how well it did there, right?
Mm-hmm.
It did so much damage, and it required the players to have 2 removal spells, one for the Bowmasters itself, and one for the Orc army that it had made. I don't think it will do that well in every game it plays in, but it stops the decks it wants to stop, right? Blue Farm, it really hinders. I think it having Flash is so strong. Like, this is a good card, don't get me wrong. And I think it's a good card because it requires people in the current meta to respect it. I don't think it needs to be banned. I think people are too quick with that, but it's really good. I think Flash, the things you can do with Flash and that they gave this card Flash is crazy to me. It's an outlet. It checks so many boxes. I don't have as much hype as some people do because at the end of the day, it still lets me draw cards. Yes, it can hurt me for that. Yes, it can hurt my things for that. I mean, look at Drannith. Drannith's a card that hurts certain decks more than others. I kind of look at it like that. But I can still win the game through Orcish Bowmasters. In that game with Atraxa, we saw it do all that damage, but it also gave players new hands, essentially. And if any of them had drawn a WinCon piece, Thassa's Oracle, Breach, or anything like that, it wouldn't have stopped them. So I think the card is good. And for the reasons I've said, I think it's not balanced, but not ban-worthy.
Well, I agree with pretty much everything you said about it. Like, I tend to be more a fan of Spirit of the Labyrinth than Archivist of Ogma, right? If I'm playing stacks, I want people to not do the thing, not to get slightly punished for doing the thing. That said, I think what you're missing a little bit about Bowmasters is the Bowmasters isn't so much there to stop the player who's drawing cards. It's there to kind of take advantage of that player to make the guy who isn't's life a living hell.
Mhm.
It's there to kill every last Elvish Mystic, Birds of Paradise, 2 toughness commander in the world. You know, the fact that it's not stopping you from winning is fine. It was just more like using you to hit somebody else.
Yes.
And that said, if you are like a Turbo Nas deck, you know, that army gets big pretty fast. It will start hitting your life total. Now, that's not the same as a stacks piece, but it has the same result if the turbo deck isn't going super fast. Like, I was pretty high on this card from the beginning. Like, I thought people were maybe overrating it a little bit. The more I see it and the more I think about it, I don't think they were. Like, I think this card is basically going to be in 95+% of black decks pretty fast. Is it ban worthy? Absolutely not. Does it push the format in a slightly less healthy direction? Yeah, it does. But like, yeah, this one is going to be everywhere and probably rightfully so. It's just excellent.
Mhm.
Well, talking about the way that it impacts Turbo, it has Flash. If you're playing against Rogsai, they go for a wheel, you're like, aha, you see, I have a Bowmaster. You're now at 20 life.
You've activated my trap card.
Yeah, you're now at 20 life or even lower potentially.
Yeah, and the thing is, too, like, those decks aren't going to cut wheels because of that. They might run their own Orcish Bowmasters because of that. Like, if I'm going to wheel, I'm going to take advantage of Orcish Bowmaster.
Mm-hmm.
Wheels are going to be in a funny place for a while here. I think a lot of people are going to have some decisions to make about wheels. Either do I try to take advantage of the Orcish Bowmasters, or do I worry about getting blown out by one? Like, wheeling into 2 open mana is going to be a lot riskier than it used to be.
It is.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I don't think people, even before Bowmasters, should just casually run wheels. I don't think they were good enough before just because of the risks they presented. And now you have the decks that can run Bowmaster, who are going to run wheels to abuse that effect. Like the Malcolm Vile list we saw earlier, that deck is curated to play those cards in combination with one another.
Yeah, my prediction is we're going to see the wheels get a lot more polarized. There's going to be a lot of like Opus Thief and no wheels.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're gonna see a lot of decks either go all in on wheels or just cut them entirely. Now, not every deck, but a lot of decks, I think we're gonna see that. There's not gonna be a lot of decks that are running the one wheel or the one windfall as kind of a maybe piece anymore. I think it's gonna get pretty polarized because you either want to be blowing people out with the Orcish Lumberjack or not getting blown out by it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I am going to point out, though, that Bowmaster is not just I win off of wheels. It is also, in certain decks, really good beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
In Ob Nixilis, it itself is a draw engine. It's insane. It's so good. But then you also have, like, in Tyam, a deck that largely underperformed this tournament from what people were expecting. But, man, it gives not only a very impactful interaction / soft stacks piece, it also gives it a win con.
Mm-hmm.
Because Bowmaster, the ETB pings, which means you can loop that ETB.
Yeah, and I mean it's also a great source of counters for Tyam.
Yep, absolutely.
I mean, if you're Rakdos loves this card even besides because you didn't just have those Cloudstone lines be so much cleaner now.
Oh yeah.
I'm trying to think of a black deck that doesn't want this, and I'm basically coming up empty.
Crick probably doesn't want this.
That was all I could think of was Crick, maybe not Crick.
Or even Crick,
because it just doesn't synergize with your Ultra Turbo plan.
No, but Crick does still have it for removing stacks pieces, though.
Oh, does it? Okay.
I feel like if you're playing Crick, you're just kind of shrugging, saying, "Guess I lose the stacks pieces," but
Fair enough.
No, you lose to removal more often than stacks pieces, but
you lose to pretty much everything when you're Crick. It's kind of pretty glass cannon.
Yeah, but like we've been saying, removal is necessary because we're in a creature-based meta right now, and this deals with a lot of creatures. In most situations, I would rather be at 20 life and still get to wheel, rather than be at 40 life and have another player Notion Thief and draw all the cards.
Oh yeah.
But it's still devastating.
Yeah, I think this Bowmaster might even push the format away from creatures a little bit. Just because I think you're going to see a lot less like Kinnan and maybe Nagila in the near future, just because this is one more card that just makes their lives hell.
Well, you know what deck this card makes so much better? Tivit. Because this card doesn't stop Tivit at all.
No. Especially the ones that aren't running AdNause. Like, what do you care if they take off half your life total?
Exactly. You can draw cards, and they can't touch you. So you're going to keep doing what you're doing while everyone else is suffering.
Yeah, we'll certainly have to see how much this impacts the format as a whole, assuming it doesn't get banned, which we'll see. Because apparently there is some talks about that.
Can I just say the whole ban Mirkwood Bats thing is just absolute insanity to me?
Honestly, I have a whole thing about whenever people are asking for bans about like every card in the universe. Like we can talk about bans another podcast because I could go on about it, but we don't have the time now.
Well, we have to at some point, right? That's how you get clicks.
Yeah, we'll talk about
clicks.
We will absolutely talk about the bans at some point, but we're going to be moving on to our official off-meta champion of the tournament. This was a bit of a weird one, honestly. We had a lot of decks that were not like far fringe and were like, okay, this is a deck that used to be more known and then is starting to see an uptick in play, like Tassiger, which got some cool interactions because of Hoarding Broodlord, as well as seeing some like interesting stuff that didn't quite perform, like Folly and Gitrog or Lord Windgrace.
Hapatra was there.
Yeah.
I mean, Marath's an obvious choice, but we already kind of talked about it because of top 16.
Oh yeah, Marath would absolutely be the choice, but we did just spend a good bit of time talking about it. And there is another choice that we thought about with Aragorn being a new card, the 4-color Aragorn. But we feel like while potentially it has some room for some growth, it's not quite there yet. It's definitely a deck that could have some experimentation with it and be pretty cool. But we're going to be talking about something that none of us were expecting to see at all, ever, with Isha. When I hear 4-color, green, white, black, blue partner, this is certainly not what I think of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I always think Cadell Ravos myself.
Yes, the real meta pick.
But Isha is a deck that, at least with the way that this person brought it, is a Hermit Druid list that also runs your Isha as ways to pad up your life total so that you get, regardless of what point in the game it is, you will get value from Necropotence and you'll get value from AdNause.
Yeah, like if you can think of a Timnathras deck, I know there's a bunch of different ways you can build that deck, but this looks like a Timnathras deck. And the only tech I can see here to want to run Isha is to get as much value as you can from the Necropotence. Ikra can just get you so much life. Isha can too, which can keep your Nauses healthier and just let you go further. And I guess Necropotence kind of makes up for the card advantage that you lose by giving up something like Timna and Thrasios.
Well, I think part of what makes this deck worth consideration at all is that people aren't going to focus you. People see, oh, you're running Isha. They're just going to be like, oh, well, that's probably fine, I guess. I mean, it's 4 colors, but how bad can it be, right?
Yeah, not exactly a partner pairing that strikes fear into the hearts of a CDH table.
See, you say that until all of a sudden you're one hit away from a buff bird monk staring you down. Then you get a lot of attention put on you.
I love Isha. I do not underrate Isha. I think the format is sleeping on Isha a little bit. Like that is a legit scary Magic card. I'm a little surprised though with this list they didn't just go full hog and run the Bolas' Citadel too and the Peer into the Abyss if we're really going. Well, I guess not Peer, but I'm kind of surprised they didn't run the Bolas Citadel on top of all that if they're really going for the gain life in the mid game plan.
Well, they instead decided to do what you asked them to do and run 29 lands. So,
I like it. It's a good number. It's a good number.
But yeah, it's an interesting list. It's not anything too crazy as far as the 99, or I guess 98 in this instance, but running some very different commanders for it.
And just to highlight, I don't know if we highlighted the pilot, but this is W_Love 2001.
Congratulations to W Love for winning our unofficial, official off-meta champion. I think I flipped those words around, but it's fine.
Winning with no Orcish Bowmasters too, the real impressive feat.
I mean, we did already have a whole segment talking about our thoughts on it, but it did really show up.
It did.
Most black decks ran it, with very few exceptions. And I think that was a correct choice.
I'll also point out too, almost all the black decks that did very well ran the Bowmasters.
Yeah.
Like basically the only black decks with more than one win that didn't run Bowmasters were one of the Timnathras, like one of the Tivits, and I think that's actually it.
The only counterpoint I would have to that is most of the black decks that didn't do well also ran the Bowmaster, so just everyone's running the Bowmaster.
Yeah,
I mean, you got a point.
It makes it hard to be like, oh, Bowmaster is good or Bowmaster is bad when we don't have the exact turn breakdown of everything. And when like 80% of the black decks are running Bowmaster.
I mean, Bowmaster's good. That's why 80% of the black decks are running it, I would say.
Yeah, that it certainly does add credence to that. But I do think some larger breakdowns, Pivot having 4 players brought, all of which getting a win, Sissy having 5 pilots for it, which, yeah, we were talking about how Sissy got the uptick because of likely Comedian performing really well with it. And
4 of them got a win.
Yeah. Kinnan with 4, not quite performing as consistently, a little bit more polarized, with 2 in the top 16 and 2 dropping early without wins. Atraxa with 5, Timnathras with 6, Nagila with 5. We've got a whole lot, and even Tyam with 4, which only one of them were able to pick up a win, unfortunately.
Yeah, and Rocco with 4, and none of them got a win.
Yeah, that's a big disappointment for Rocco.
Yeah, really poor showing for Rocco. 3 draws, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, Rocco is a deck that a lot of people have been talking about for quite a while, and there have been really good performances from it from very good pilots. And there's a whole lot of pilots that swear by Rocco, but really underperforming here.
Yeah, this is an interesting turnout, right? Because you have the high density of kind of tried and true decks, but a very high spread of kind of weird things. Liberator. Someone decided to bring Urith to this tournament, so kudos to them for trying that one. I just noticed this one. Bruce Kodama. I have no idea what that deck's trying to do, but it came and it got a draw.
That's Naya.
That is Naya.
You. Said the guy who just gushed about Marath for 5 minutes.
Facts. But yeah, it's interesting spot for Stacks. I wonder whether Bowmaster being in the game impacted Stacks' performance, especially for Rocco.
I mean, what do they say in Game of Thrones? That which is dead can never die. I don't know. I feel like Stacks has done so poorly that if Bowmaster's made it any worse, it's just stop. He's already dead.
And it's interesting that you mentioned Stacks, right? Because I think for the longest time, Hate Bears have been good, but Stacks as an archetype have struggled. Like, you don't see too many rule of laws anymore. And this is only my experience that we saw on stream. Maybe it was different for the rest of the pods, but we saw a lot of actual rule of law effects this weekend.
Oh yeah, like the Maratha deck was a rule of law Stacks deck that only drew one of its games.
Yeah.
Because that deck can't actually win fast under a rule of law. But yeah, rule of law Stacks is about as dead as a doornail. Like this is the first time in a while we've seen anyone do anywhere decent with it in a while.
I mean, Elish Norn got a win and a draw. And that's like mono white, win conless kind of stacks.
Yeah,
So-
mother machines.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting spot to be in. Maybe another podcast we can break that down. But for now, as we come to an end, as we're already pretty long into this episode, we are going to our closing segment, the classic Bedwet Dead. This time, we wanted to talk about some of the new cards. Unfortunately, Bowmaster is just too good to be included in this list. So, Bowmaster, because it is already auto-included in all of our lists, will not be in the conversation for Bedwet Dead this week. Instead, we will be having Delighted Halfling, Stern Scolding, and Lotho Corrupt Sheriff.
All right. So I guess I'll start it off here. So I've been on record quite a bit saying that people aren't running enough creature removal. Now here we have Stern Scolding, which is not exactly creature removal, but a creature counterspell that people actually want to play in this format.
Stop Stock said.
Yeah, it's the best like 1 mana creature counterspell we've ever had, and it's a good one. It's counter any creature spell with 2 power or 2 toughness, which hits probably 95% of the things you want to hit with it. Like there are very few creatures you want to counter this will not counter. But I'm not quite ready to wet it here. I feel like there's a lot of lists that still aren't running all the good 1 mana removal options, and with a couple of notable exceptions like say Dockside and Thassa's Oracle, you're generally happier just killing the creature at your leisure than countering it outright. So I think some people were running it in this tournament. I think that was a little bit because it was kind of the new thing they wanted to try, kind of the flavor of the month. I think this card is going to stick around. It's going to see some play. I don't think it's an auto-include in blue decks. I think people should probably finish out their creature removal sweep before they think about running this in a lot of cases. So I'm going to bed Stern Scolding. You know, I think it's decent, but it's not a total slam dunk. But the slam dunk here, I would say I am going to wed Lotho.
Fair.
I think that card is just excellent. I think most decks that are white and black and probably not actively trying to lock out artifacts are going to be on this in short order. It's not quite Smothering Tithe on a creature, but it's Smothering Tithe on a creature for half the mana. Like this is probably going to get you at least 1, possibly 2 or 3 treasures every turn cycle, while being in Timna colors that so you can hit people to try to draw cards off of it. This one is going to see quite a bit of play. I love it. I'm putting it in pretty much every white-black deck I have that isn't trying to lock the artifacts out, so one of them. And so, yeah, I'm going to wed Lotho, which means I'm going to dead Delighted Halfling. You know, as a lover of mana dorks, this one's hard for me, but I just don't think the creature is as good as a lot of people are giving it credit for. You know, a lot's been said about, oh, you definitely don't want X creature you play countered, but who's countering creatures in this format? I mean, the list of counter spells people play that can counter creatures, I can count on one hand and probably 3 fingers, right? We're talking basically Force of Will and Red Blasts, and I guess maybe Stern Scolding now. But there's just not a lot of spells that counter creatures. So you're mainly running this for just the mana production. It taps for colorless. You know, Boreal Druid's not in a lot of lists, but it's in a few. And then colorless or colored mana of your choice to cast a legendary spell. I mean, I'll just say this. I am like the biggest Joda the Unifier fanboy there is. And if there was ever a deck that probably wanted Delighted Halfling, it would be Joda, and I am not running it in Joda. I'm not running Plaza of Heroes in Joda either. If I'm not going to run this effect as a land, I'm not running it on a mana dork either. There's just too many spells in the deck it doesn't help you cast. The making you uncounterable just isn't high impact enough. I think some decks that are maybe like 2 colors or less are going to want to run this. You know, if you were on Boreal Druid, this is pretty much a slam dunk. If you weren't, I don't think you probably want to play it. So while it won't be unplayed entirely, nor should it be, I'm going to dead Delighted Halfling.
See, as I said earlier, have been on an Atraxa kick recently, and Delighted Halfling in that deck is so juicy. Like, yeah, Delighted Halfling, not great in every single deck, but in a handful of decks, it is a really good card. And personally, getting Atraxa countered is one of the saddest things possible. Spending 7 mana to get this hugely impactful creature, and then it just gets countered before it even does anything. It really sucks. So having another way to have it stop being countered, absolutely worth running. Though I don't know if it's worth wedding. So I will be putting that as my bet. Now I've got a tough choice. Do I want interaction? Or do I want mana?
Yes.
Well, obviously, yes. None of these cards are bad. All of these cards are good and worth playing in your decks. But I think I've got to wed Lotho? Weirdly enough, because I don't have it in any of my lists yet, but I probably have to change that soon based off of how it performed for this last event and based off of what people have been saying about it. And all of the chatter about it has been positive for both Lotho, both in like Atraxa and for Tivit and even a couple other lists. It just seems like a very impactful card, and the fact that it triggers off of yourself as well, really nice bonus there. So Lotho will be my wed, and unfortunately that leaves my interaction on the cutting floor, as I will be deading the Scolding.
I see. All right. I guess that brings me up, and I'll start with Lotho. So, Lotho, you ask me, during Pride Month, to wed or bed a corrupt sheriff. During Pride Month, a corrupt cop, I just can't do it. So, despite how good Lotho is, mana's nice. Getting additional mana, especially when it triggers for yourself, is so nice. But happy Pride Month, everyone. Going on to Stern Scolding. So, if I were a comedian in the 90s or early 2000s, being able to marry in Stern Scolding, the material writes itself, right? That's all those jokes are. My partner XX Stern scolded me, but
Take my wife, please.
We're in 2023 now. Those jokes just don't cut it anymore. And I love Stern Scolding. I think that card is definitely underrated. I think that there are decks that would love to play that card to beat out the stacks and still go as fast as they wanted to. Draneth, Stern Scolding. and so on and so forth. And it has utility because it can stop things like Orcish Bowmaster, it can stop Grand Abolishers, it could stop Thassa's Oracles. I think it's good at a lot of points in the game and gives you extra utility so your Force of Wills or Mind Break Traps aren't as, I guess, sought after. They're still good, but they're not do or die in most situations. For that reason, I do think I want to bed Stern Scolding. I want to see that card get more play, and I'm curious to see where it goes, but I'm not committed to it yet. I'm just checking it out, you know? We're staring at each other, we're giving each other the eyes, and we're just going to see what happens. On to Delighted Halfling. So, I'm a Sissy player, and a lot of Sissy players are happy about Delighted Halfling. I think that you can use it to cast combo pieces from your hand without them being countered, especially if you're running a lot of planeswalkers, is really good. I do think that in most circumstances, it's only going to give you colorless, is kind of so-so, especially in the decks that are so color intensive. I think things like Cavern of Souls in most situations are just going to be better, but I like the card, and in the right deck, it will just keep your tempo going and make you nigh unstoppable. Atraxa, Sissy, just any of those commanders will do so well. I think Kenrath, if you can make an argument, it could be good there. So I think it's good. I think it won't be the card that is remembered when people think back on this set, but it will be a card that sticks around, and I'm happy to be wedded to that.
Honestly, kind of sweet. Very adorable. A very wholesome ending with Neko. And that will, in fact, be our ending as we come to a close here. Once again, thank all of you for watching, as well as special thank you to our patrons. Special shout out to Frenchie at our Feldar Guardian tier, as well as That Mandu, Aries, string of numbers, which hopefully is correct. It's _9865. I hope that's not a typo or anything. And then The Exterminator. Yeah, thank you guys all so much for your support, as well as thank you to all the other patrons. Really could not do this without you. Make sure, not just for the patrons, but for everyone, you've made it this far, go down and give us your thoughts on Orcish Bowmaster in the comments. That will be us for today. We hope to see you at next tournament. Remember, third Saturday of the month, every month. This next one is going to be July 15th. We'll see you then.
See ya.